Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to the podcast, Digitally Transformed. I am your host, Melissa, and let's get into it. Today we're talking about something very important. We're going to continue the conversation about cybersecurity, and that is because cyber attackers are getting increasingly smart, capable, and only more so as time goes on. And with increased vulnerability from all of the public health fears and shuffled work settings and organizations that are now going remote and hybrid, individuals and companies have suffered a great deal of attacks these last couple years. There is no denying that. And that's on top of what was already a massive problem. Some of these numbers that I am going to share with you may alarm you, especially if you have not been paying close attention to cybersecurity or the industry or what's going on. So let's get into it. Here are 10 cybersecurity stats that you should be aware of. So the first one is that cyber crimes have gone up 300% since COVID-19 began. That is a lot. The FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center reported that cybersecurity complaints went from around 1,000 a day at the beginning of the pandemic to 3,000 to 4,000 daily as of late spring this last year. By summer, it was documented over 12,000 scams that were directly related to COVID-19, such as those that lured individuals into malicious links by promising health information and other things. In other cases, hackers took advantage of displaced attention, workplace reorganizing, and general social unrest to launch other kinds of attacks. Okay, stat number 2. Up to 95% of breaches could be prevented with user awareness. 95% is really high, you guys. Several sources, just like this one, attribute 90 to 95% of successful cyber attacks to human user error. So these are things like inadvertent opening of malicious files and using weak or old passwords, or even intentional misconduct on the part of employees, and they end up becoming these massive vulnerabilities. That's why cyber literacy training and insider risk management, which is very similar to a lot of what I talked about with Mike Miller in our last podcast episode, are so important in protecting your organization. All right, here is the third stat. Only 5% of companies' folders are protected properly. And along the same lines, only a small 5% of folders are actually protected as they should be. As Varonis puts it, your files called. They want their privacy back. In a risk assessment of 54 billion files, they found all kinds of sensitive files that weren't private. Think about how much stronger organizations, specifically your organization's files and networks, would be by just addressing employee awareness folder protection. Okay, the fourth stat is that the average cost of a data breach is $3.9 million. Yes, a whopping 3.9 million. That is a massive number, and this is just for small to medium-sized businesses. For larger, publicly traded companies, that number goes way up to 116 million. And for many companies, this ends up being financially crippling, not to mention the damage to your reputation and productivity. A company's share prices also fall after a breach and can trend lower for a while. A company called Comparitech found that share prices were an average of 8.6% lower a year after a breach and an average of 15.6% lower after 3 years. All right, on to stat number 5. The industries most vulnerable to attack are government, technology, retail, and healthcare. In terms of industries, the healthcare industry suffers the highest average data breach, which costs about $7.13 million. But even more frequently targeted are government, technology, and retail industries. And what all of these industries share is a large amount of personal identifying information, so they are a popular aim for cyber attacks. The sixth stat that I have for you is that the average life cycle of a breach is 280 days. An IMB report showed that last year, it actually took companies an average of 207 days to simply identify a breach. And then the life cycle until containment averaged around 280 days. That's over 9 months of finding and recovering from an attack that can be incredibly financially disabling and disruptive to work. Sounds to me like it's worth every effort to prevent it from happening in the first place. All right, stat number 7, 1 in every 323 emails at small companies is a phishing email. According to a Symantec report last year, 1 in 4,200 emails in the first quarter of 2020 were phishing emails. And that might not sound like bad odds, but think about how many emails you have in your various email inboxes. And if you're in a smaller organization of less than 250 employees, your rate of malicious emails goes up to 1 in 323. This makes small businesses and organizations the most highly targeted places for email attacks. The 8th stat that I've got for you, in another report of Symantec's, found 1 in 13 web requests leading to malware. In their report, they stated that this problem was exacerbated by older operating systems that truly could not protect the newer threats. Mobile malware variants were particularly troublesome. The 9th stat that I have for you today is that supply chain attacks increased by 78% in 2019. Supply chain attacks, which basically penetrate a network through a trusted vendor who becomes then compromised, have been steadily increasing over the past several years. In 2019, Symantec reported a sharper increase of 78%. With the SolarWinds hack affecting governments and enterprises around the world last year, supply chain attacks have only become even more of a troubling concern. And the last and final very important statistic that I have for you is that there are about 4 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs in the world. That's a lot. One positive result of these otherwise alarming numbers is that there are a lot of jobs to be filled. 70% of cybersecurity professionals feel that their organization has a shortage of cybersecurity. And cybersecurity positions grew 350% from 2013 to 2021. Today, there are around 4 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs worldwide, and the occupation's unemployment rate is 0%, which is great news if you are a cybersecurity professional looking for work. Ultimately, cybersecurity stats have real impacts. All of these numbers can be absolutely dizzying, but not as dizzying and catastrophic as it is to have your organization breached. The stats we're all faced with reflect the importance of cybersecurity as well as a zero trust approach. If you want help cementing your organization's security with the absolute best tools and guidance, just reach out to us today. And that's all for today. Thanks for tuning in. We'll chat with you next week.